This podcast is brought to you by Ride IQ. Ride IQ is a first-of-its-kind equestrian coaching platform that will transform your independent schooling rides. Ride IQ members get access to the private mobile app with hundreds of on-demand listen-while-you-ride audio lessons taught by the world's top eventing, hunter-jumper, and dressage coaches. Membership is only $29.99 per month, and every membership automatically includes a free trial when you sign up at ride-iq.com. Welcome to Ride IQ. On today's episode of In Stride, Sinead interviews Shawna Karrash. Shawna is an internationally recognized equine behaviorist and trainer credited for pioneering the use of positive reinforcement training with horses. Shawna's humane techniques have helped Olympic medalists and amateurs alike. Shawna began her training career and her positive reinforcement research working with marine mammals, including dolphins, sea lions, and orcas. Shawna went on to introduce her training methods in equestrian sports and was hired by world-renowned show jumpers John and Beezie Madden. Shawna is credited for helping Beezie's horse, Judgement ISF, overcome his fear of the water jump. Beezie and Judgement ISF went on to win the $1 million CN International at Spruce Meadows and many other international victories. Today, Sinead and Shawna do a Mythbusters episode about positive reinforcement training. We hope you enjoy.
Hello. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm actually very excited and my hopes are very high. So no pressure.
It's nice. We do talk easy.
I know. It's so funny. I was like, oh my God, I'm running so late. And there have been times when I've sat and prepared for like an hour because I haven't known someone, I haven't known what I was going to do. And I was like, this is going to be easy. I was like, we're both chatty. So I think this will just be a fun conversation and our listeners will really enjoy it.
Good.
So, and what I want to, talk about is actually something you said it when you were here. And you just made a comment about kind of getting knowledge out there and spreading the knowledge and communicating and, everybody kind of having a story and a experience. And, it's something that Tick and I have really enjoyed the last year. And we've really tried to, we've been so fortunate to have people like you come to the farm and share your expertise and, share the knowledge with us so that we can kind of incorporate it. Well, we can incorporate it into our training and then share it with our people. And then hopefully this message of, kind horsemanship and how it can float into the competitive world and the amateur world and the young rider world and the groundwork world, all of it can flood together. So it's a better place for horses and riders and anybody that's involved with the horses. And I'm just so excited for you to be a part of this because that really in the last, few podcasts, that seems to be the direction that we're going with this is to try and really bring that aspect into the training, have this perspective in the training. And there's obviously 1,000 different ways to do things. But, when you were here a couple of weeks ago, it was just like the whole place was just this positive, happy place to be. And, and the horses, when you left, the horses were like, where did she go? When is she coming back? That was the best clinic ever. So I'm really excited that you are joining us is basically my long-winded way of saying that.
Well, it's great to be here. And it's great to see you again because it has been a real highlight of my time down in Ocala was being with you and Tick and working with both of you and the individual things that we're doing. And it's just exciting. And like you said, I love helping to add another tool to the toolbox. It's an old cliche, but it truly is what it is. It's another way to look at it and another perspective, kind of trying to go back to the horses and their perspective in a way that hasn't really, let's face it, for the longest time, we didn't really know about behavior in the horse world, like scientific behavior. So it's exciting to share it. So I love seeing you again and I'm happy to be here.
See, I'm already taking notes. I'm already writing stuff down. Well, let's bring our listeners into, what your expertise is, which is really positive reinforcement and clicker training. And those words are obviously like the back of your hand, but can you explain the difference between positive, negative reinforcement and how that ties in with clicker training?
Yes, absolutely. And so positive and negative reinforcement, and years ago. So keep in mind, I've been at this in the horse world for about 28 years. So I had 10 years in marine mammals before that, then 28 with the horses. And I really thought people are going to be, this is so great. They're just going to embrace it because they don't know about positive reinforcement. And that wasn't my case. That's not what I experienced.
You got some pushback?
Yeah, just a
What?
little. But things are really changing now. But way back, I think we had like the social definition of positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, meaning you beat your horse.
Right.
Positive reinforcement means you don't beat your horse. And
Right.
that is not how it was written. That's not what it means. It's not good and bad. It is something added to the equation, which increases the frequency of behavior, something subtracted from the equation, which increases the frequency of behavior. So think of it like a positive and negative number. One wasn't good, one wasn't bad, one was added, one was subtracted. So with positive reinforcement, we're adding something to the equation that the horse values. And oftentimes that's food. That's really powerful because they actually need it to survive. And then with traditional training, we apply it's pressure and release. We put, if we want a horse to go forward, we on a rudimentary level, we're going to squeeze with our legs. If they're good, we remove that pressure. And if they don't do it, we keep the pressure up, or we even escalate the pressure until we get the response we want. Then we say that's how you're going to get the pressure to go away. So they're working for that pressure to go away. So that's a subtraction when the addition of food is the added. So it's not saying good and bad. I want to preface that and make that clear. Now there's advantages, that can be a part of both of those training methods. And then clicker training that's a term. Like when I worked with marine mammals, we never called it clicker training. It's just not what we called it. Yeah. So it's a term that came from the dog world. In particularly, Karen Pryor coined the phrase and took it to the dog world. So it is, so that is really, it is the same pieces, but it can be, but a lot of times the dog training on a more basic level, it's for the dog owner. There's instructors that teach it. But and now more and more you're getting more instructors learning about it. But clicker training was a term that came from the dog world. But it doesn't mean they're separate. It just means it came from the dog world. So that's where that came in. So they're not separate from each other. But you know what I've noticed? There's a lot of people out there, and I think this is a product of more and more people knowing it, but not quite getting it right. So there's people that have used food in their training, but they haven't used it well.
Right.
So then I meet people that say, oh no, I don't do clicker training. I don't feed my horses. No. And so when I hear that, I kind of think, well, then they don't really know what it is, or they've seen it done poorly. Right. Because it's not just feeding. It is a systematic approach where we plan on feeding the food from that, fading the food from that behavior once it's good and strong. So it's a systematic approach that we're trying to fade that in a way. And it's all based in science. I didn't make any of it up. It's in science, but it's part art and part science. So that's a wordy way.
I love that. But it's part art and part science is like, that is an amazing way to string that together, because you've got this thing and you're getting the feedback and it's working, and it's this type of thing when it's done well. And now it seems like, especially as of lately, there's science that's starting to back up kind of the behaviors, which if you pull back from everything from, horsemanship from times past and books from times past, that's where kind of this horse whispering or amazing elusive trainers, like how did they do all this stuff? Because they were basically good at the feedback and reading what was happening in front of them. And then later the science came to back it up. And then all of a sudden people go, oh, there's something to that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. People think they think it's some mystery, I don't know how he does it. And it's because they're paying attention to the smallest cues. So the science, it's not like somebody went out and invented all this. They noticed it, and started taking note. So the marine mammal world, we've been applying positive reinforcement the whole time. Nothing but positive reinforcement. So really, it was the first place that took it out of textbooks and actually put it into a practical application on a bigger scale. So that is kind of where it started. But it is, and there's also academics that can teach positive reinforcement, and boy, are they good at teaching it and sharing about it. But you'll watch videos sometimes with some of them with animals, and you're like, that's painful. because just because they have the science part, it doesn't mean they have the art part. The art part takes time, and a lot of horse people already have the art part down. So now it's just taking that science and putting it with the art. And that, I think it's one of the biggest things I see with people when they're new. And then they're like, I'm afraid to do anything because I might get it wrong. And they get that analysis paralysis, that and they don't want to do anything. And you're like, trust your gut, trust what feels right, when it feels right, when you breathe a sigh of relief, when you smile, when you, whatever it is, that is in you, and that. So it's just breaking it down to smaller pieces, but that's the art part. And that only comes really with spending time with horses, which is an advantage to most horse people. I mean, there's some people you think you need more time with horses, but really it is art and science. It's not all one or all the other, so you could study until the cows come home. But if you don't get out there and start paying attention to different horses, you're not going to develop that art part, which is so essential.
So going to the art part and reading horses and kind of seeing things, you came back out and helped me with a few of my horses after you taught the clinic. And the last time you came out, you helped me with a new German horse that I got over. And I didn't tell you too much about him, but you picked up pretty quickly that he wasn't really connecting some dots really quick, like he hadn't learned to be a problem solver right away. And I'm like, yes, I know. Like, he's so obedient. He, he knows all the tricks. He's like a well-trained puppy. But if you don't give him the exact cues, he's kind of like, in la la land sometimes. But is there a way? So when I'm watching, if somebody comes in for a lesson or I get on a horse, I kind of have a little checklist that I go through, that I'm kind of in my assessment part of the phase, and I'm kind of picking some things up. Do you have something like that when you first meet a horse or you're first paying attention? Is it something that you watch about their personality or how they approach you, or something in your assessment part of, or maybe even how you watch them with their person? Is there something that you kind of pick out, or a system that you have when you're getting to know someone or a horse?
Well, and this is one of the things that's made it harder for me to teach sometimes because of having, a past that has made me hyper vigilant.
Right.
I will pick up so many things that I consciously didn't know I picked up.
Right.
So I would pick up and react and pick up and react and pick up and react. So teaching has helped me to kind of pull that apart. But I don't really have that checklist, because a lot of times I'm going to go right in and feel it. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to notice, do they walk with me, or are they hesitant? Do they look, they raise their head a little bit and look a little apprehensive about what I'm doing? Are they all over me like a cheap suit? And I'm like, whoa, back off, bushy man. Or so there's different pieces I look for. And really they do tend to be, then they kind of go to certain categories. They're perfunctory categories because they're all individuals, so none of them, I can't say that they're all the same, but I start to think, okay, you're more on the bold side. You're more on the hesitant side. So that's where I start. And I think, okay, so you need a little more calming and settling. You need a little more motivation and engaging. So I kind of start there, and then I'm going to pick out some pieces, because even then, we now start to have subdivisions of that. So it is not necessarily a real checklist, because particularly I deal with things all over the map, whether it's a ridden horse, whether that it's a ridden issue, or it's a husbandry issue, or it's a, shut down rescue issue, or so it can be all over the place. And I will have people say, let me tell you, this is what it is. I'm like, doesn't matter what you say. I mean, I don't say that, but in my head, I think I'm going to get a read on this pretty quickly of what I'm feeling. And it might be different for what they do to me than they do with somebody else, but I'll kind of sort those pieces out so quickly. So there isn't a specific thing. It's a getting in and feeling and this sounds so ethereal, but it is so true. There's an energy that they put off, and it's
Mhm.
physical. They physically feel nervous, or they physically feel too energetic, or they physically feel, disconnected, or whatever it is, because when they feel that way, it is literally a different physical thing that they do. So I wish I had a better list for people.
No, I
or
think that
recipes.
I think that's actually a very honest, digestible thing. I mean, it's being open, walking in and not having that, not having someone lead the witness. This is my
Yeah.
horse and this is all their stuff. And then you're like, um, and and having an openness to go in and go, what do you have to say? Like, what do you have to say? And just picking that up in the moment. I think that's one of the biggest gifts for our horses, and one of the things that we can do to promote our training, honestly, is to be present in those
Mhm.
situations. So I think that actually is an excellent answer. um, and I think, like a lot of people think they should always have the answers. And that's when you get in trouble with horses and they call you out, right?
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? As soon as we start doing that, yes, it's so true. And anywhere. I mean, I go, even working with you, and we're going, okay, well, this is what's going on here. You're like, okay, well, let's try this. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And you
Mhm.
don't know that it's going to be, it's not like I have a recipe book and I go, that's what it is. It's like, let's see if this improves. Let's see
Mhm.
if this improves. Let's see if this helps. Does she respond to this, respond to that, whatever the piece might be. So I think it is really trying to stay open and looking at them as individuals, because they are all such individuals. So there's somebody named Dr. Susan Friedman, and she's a behaviorist out of Utah State. And she says it's a study of one. And I
Right.
love that, because it really is. That's what I want to look at this one and say, okay, how can I help you to be a more well-adjusted horse? How can I do that in this human-centric world that you live in, or whatever your role is here? How can I help you to be, to thrive?
Mhm.
And I think that, and that doesn't come in exclusion of showing for most horses. I think actually, if done well, showing is actually quite the environmental enrichment. But
Mhm.
I think there's plenty of horses out there that haven't been brought along in a way that they think showing is great, but
Mhm.
really I want to develop them and help them to thrive in whatever, their life looks like.
Yeah, that's interesting that you just went there, because that's what I was going to ask. Like, with your angle and your perspective in your training, would you see yourself more as exactly that you come in and you help horses develop life skills, like you said, in a very human world, like almost helping them adjust and think and process in a slightly different way to almost bridge that gap, so that then that relationship that they have in whatever their job is or whatever that is, they just handle that easier? Is that what you feel like
Yes.
your goal is?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to yes, I want to help them adapt, but I also want the human to understand them. One of the things I think we haven't been really, with traditional training, we haven't always been taught to look at the smallest little things that they tell us. So
Right.
there's just, if the horse raises her head an inch, I think, well, why was that? And it doesn't mean it was anything that I have to worry about, but I'm going to go, I see that you did that. And maybe it was nothing, but maybe you're saying, uh-oh, here comes the saddle, or whatever
Mhm.
piece it is. So I think all those little things, they're communicating so much all along the way. So if I can help the human to also understand a little bit more about what motivates horses and how they can adjust that, then I think we can get that team to be truly a team that is
Yeah.
communicating back and forth with one another, that we're listening to our horses, but our horses also trust us more. And we have a clearer form of communication that can help us to get there as as quickly as we can, but without hurrying it. That the horse needs the time it takes. And there's been a few situations where I've thought this horse should not have traditional training. you know, for a while,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's a little bit more of an extreme case. But that's kind of your rarity. You come in and think, okay, this part's good, this part's good, this part looks a little tense,
Right.
so then we can address that part and help them to know how to process that part, and us help them to process that part. And I think that sometimes we need to come in a side door if things have been done this certain way, and bringing more of the same gets us, let's say it's a problem area. So we've gotten to the point that if we ask for the Canada part, whatever it is, and we get this really head high worry transition, okay, well, we don't need to do more of the same that caused that, even though it's not the same person and the same things, but let's come in a side door. Let's kind of break this down a little differently and see if we can't help them to understand it in a different way. So I think trying to think along those lines and recognizing that individual where their strengths are and where their challenges are, and then we can do a lot to help them. But in the process, and now I look at that part of the training as a means to an end. I'm saying, okay, we need them to get them in the trailer. We need to get them clipped. We need to get them holding still to mounting block. We need better Canada part. We need them to go over the jumps, whatever piece. But there's also something that happens that I think is the most exciting part. And this goes back to what you said earlier, Sinead, about that now science is turning. Psychology and behavior have been considered a soft science. So for forever. But now neuroscience is catching up, and neuroscience is now being able to prove certain things that are going on in the brain. And this makes it so exciting, but because it's changing, but it's solidifying things that we've maybe seen anecdotally, but now it's saying, no, this is exactly what's going on. So as we kind of start to recognize that, it gives us a better understanding of how we can help them and where we can go with those pieces. So if we see, they're having a particular problem, we can come in and address that problem. But what starts to change is way deeper and way more profound. And to me, the most beneficial, the most important, the most gratifying part is that we start to change their emotional state. We start to change their neural pathways. We start to create trust. We create more of a pessimistic outlook. Horses tend to be what's called neophobic. They look at new sights, new sounds, new situations as a potential for bad. So they look at them and go, oh, I don't like new stuff.
Right.
And so that's a tendency. So what we want to do is create more confidence there. So they look at new things, go, what is that? And they kind of, instead of being afraid of it, they're intrigued by it. And so that is changing those neural pathways for a lot of horses. There's some horses that are confident from the second they're born, but a lot of them, they develop these fears or these worries as we go along. So trying to change that. And I didn't recognize all this with the marine mammals because they're just different. And we didn't come in halfway through their lives. They didn't come in with this background. They were, you had a young sea lion that was beached and lost from its mom. And so it had to stay, at SeaWorld. So we would train them. So they didn't come in with a ton of baggage. They just came in and thought, hey, here we are, Now they're skittish. You have to build their confidence a lot like horses. And by the way, horses and sea lions are a lot alike. And so, I love training them. But you didn't see how much you were changing with horses. I started to see, I've learned 50 times more with horses than I did with the marine mammals because of them having the varying backgrounds, having different, I just have learned so much. And what I really realized, it is so much deeper. And the best part of it all is that we can change what's underneath, which results in better behavior and more confidence or more manners or more relaxed or more engaged or whatever the missing piece might be.
And do you think that those, like the kind of the baggage, a lot of the neural pathways that have already been, created, a lot of those come from a history, from a baggage, from situations, especially if there's behavior.
Yes. I think there's sometimes that I see a horse and I think you're just like your mom. And you're both really spooky. You're like, there is some genetic history there that can lend itself to there, but we can take that and then we can make the most of it. Go, okay, I get it. You're going to be this way. I can see this historically has happened with your dad or your mom, but it is typically, I think they come from human situations. And I want to add, it wasn't ever, there's a whole contingency of people that do positive reinforcement that are rather strict with the positive reinforcement, only positive reinforcement. Some people think you shouldn't ride horses. Some people, they've kind of swung really far in one direction.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not necessary to go in that whole direction, because I think you can teach them to love showing. Showing can be a huge fun part of their life. But I think trying to get them to recognize that we've kind of swung in a different direction, but look at it a little bit softer and think, yeah, how can we create those pieces? So sometimes those people will think, I've watched it on groups, and they'll kind of attack anybody who's using traditional training. And you're like, wait a second. And even when a horse has gone down a path and they've come out of it really stressed, a lot of time it's never with malicious intent that they got there. I mean, very rarely.
Yeah.
Sometimes it probably is. But very rarely is that the case. People are just doing what they knew, and they were doing what they've been taught, and how we've done it historically for thousands of years. So now that we've kind of discovered this other piece that we can add in, it is, we're just going to kind of mesh and help teach people wherever they are. It's not like we have to get rid of everything we know. So you have that contingency that's like, no, and they're all evil. And you're like, well, no, that's not how it's being done. That's not how it's happening. It's just now. And I also think learning about the behavior is good for anybody. And even if you think, I don't want to use positive reinforcement, I think the more you understand about your horse's motivation, or your horse's how they think and how they process, and this other part from a science perspective, it's just the better partner you're going to be, regardless of which way you want to go.
Well, and I think you had said it, and it really stood out to me in one of your conversations at the clinic, and it was talking about the different parts of the brain, and that the positive reinforcement really does kind of go towards that seeking, like dopamine part of the brain, and the negative reinforcement goes more towards the fight or flight part of the brain, which is going to be more your stress hormones. So, and obviously there's gray area in between there, but I kind of was like, wow, if I can, that makes kind of sense. If I can introduce or teach something in a way that's kind of releasing dopamine, and not to get a little bit crazy, but if I can get them addicted to just being good, like are seeking like learning, or there's something in it for me, like that seems. And then every now and then, if you have to taper that down a little bit, I mean, when I used to have to get Brooks in the bath, I gave him a treat, a cookie, like whatever he wanted, until I could finally establish a routine of getting him in the bath. That's my son, not my horse. But it became a more positive place, and he'd get a new toy, and then he'd want to get in the bath and play with his toy. And that felt better than, I'm going to ground you if you don't get in the bath. And, we've had those conversations as well. But, like it kind of felt like it felt better, if that makes sense. It just felt like a better, and to have those options. And I think what, certainly since your trip here, having that mindset, and how you said, kind of coming at things through a side door, and looking and noticing and paying attention. And even if you don't totally know the answer, but knowing you can kind of come at it from a little bit of this different way, or the horse's perspective, or what motivates them, and learning that side of it seems to be a really, I don't know, kind of an inspiring way to learn and teach, if that makes sense.
Yes. I just adore you. Anyway, so I would get in the bath for you. Just kidding. but it's really true. And the learning about the different parts of the brain, that the one, when we use positive reinforcement, tends to light up the seeking system, and or the area referred to as a seeking system, and negative reinforcement or pressure release, traditional training, tends to light up the fight or flight part. That is some of the things that came from the neuroscience. So that's one of the things that's been proven. But many, many years ago, when I first started working with Beezie, so we just went that first week. I didn't know it. I didn't know her. Just went. I hadn't even done positive reinforcement with a horse yet. I mean, I did it a little bit with my own horse, but not in a systematic way. I just can't help myself. So, so we went and did it for the first time. And all I did, because it was just to see if us people could work together. So all I did was 3 5-minute sessions a day in the stall to introduce the clicker as a cue for, yes, you've done something right. and then 3 5-minute sessions a day to teach the target as a tool to help shape behavior. And so all I did was 15 minutes a day when they were in their stall. They had regular days and went on, they were ridden and, in the walker and turned out and all their regular pieces. And at the end, so I never worked with them when it came to the riding, and Beezie never worked with me when it came to the positive reinforcement. Yet at the end of the week, she said, each of those horses you're working is remarkably better in the arena. And that was the beginning of saying, well, that's interesting. Well, you know what that dovetails with is the endorphins and dopamines and the cortisol. So now as we lit up the seeking part of the brain, they started to be, their systems are flooded with endorphins and dopamines. And I'm going to add, Beezie picks horses who like their job, who already like jumping. She doesn't go after horses. There's some people who get horses and they're like, I'll just make it do that, and they're good at that. But that's not her. She gets ones that are quite agreeable to their job. So I wasn't even working with extreme cases. These are horses that I would look at and think were fairly happy, pretty happy. And yet they still, she said, each one of them was remarkably better in the arena. So that is where you start to think, okay, the endorphins and dopamines, I know all these years later, is what was responsible for that. So we can create that and we can do that. And the whole point, like just with Brooks, you want Brooks to, at first you have to go, okay, here's a cookie, here's a treat, here's a new squeaky thing, whatever it is to get him to go, okay, I want to get in the bath because what's going to come in the bath? Well, pretty soon he doesn't even think, what am I going to get in the bath? He just thinks, I love the bath. The bath is endorphins and dopamine because it becomes classically conditioned, like, Pavlovian, not to call it Pavlov's dogs, but, kind of.
That's fine. Believe me, I know nothing about raising children. I have one, but I've raised him like I would a horse. But, that is so, I want to go back to the Maddens because some of our audience might not know the history there and where that where that's actually how not obviously, but that's how our world circled. I kind of heard about the Judgement story and I'd love you to share that a little bit and how you ended up in the Madden's barn for a while, and that really kind of was a big bridge there for some of the sport horses.
Yes, it was. So what I did is, okay, so I'm a marine mammal trainer way back in the day. I mean, way back in the day, way back. We didn't have internet, let's just say, or cell phones. Yeah. But anyway, so way back then I was a marine mammal trainer, and that's where I learned to train all animals. I didn't even do horses as a kid. So I was doing that. And at one point, Elizabeth Bushburke of Anheuser-Busch, who then owned SeaWorld, gave some of us trainers tickets to see a Grand Prix. So we go see it. And I thought, well, this is fun. And the other trainer's like, whatever, bye, see you tomorrow. And I was like, wait a second. And so, I didn't do horses as a kid because I was abused as a child. And there's a story that fits in there. It's not just, oh, poor me, because you don't know any different when you're a kid. But what it did is we had horses that I was exposed to, and those horses were really good. But when I was about 6, I recognized they're very difficult to catch. And I didn't know why, but this made me feel very uncomfortable. And once you caught them, you could do whatever you wanted. They didn't have a choice at that point. And so we would, we'd catch them all the time. And it was about 6, I started thinking, I'm not comfortable with this. And I didn't know why. It wasn't until I was an adult, decades later, that I realized I was identifying with them and where I was. Yeah. And being such a small child, I told somebody about the abuse, but it wasn't listened to. So I had no choice, but to be subject to this. So I was in a state of learned helplessness in that part of my life. And those horses, I know now, were in a state of learned helplessness. So I didn't even do horses as a kid. So I really learned to train animals with the marine mammals. That's where it all was. So I didn't even come into horses with horse experience. I just thought, I watched that Grand Prix and thought, that's what I want to do.
I had that same experience.
I mean,
it's fun.
They're like,
who doesn't want to do that?
Yeah, I just want to do that. I don't know what this posting is of which you speak, but I just want to. And so, and that night, did I see some tense horses? yes, most of the horses look tense and not something that was appealing to me. But there are two horse and rider combinations that the horse looked happy. It looked easy. It looked like a walk in the park for both of them. And that to me was like, that's what I want. I have tools now that I think I could do it that way, not however it was done before. And so I got I looked into it and I kept asking Grand Prix show jumpers because I had access to them. And I kept asking them. It was in California. So it was, people on the West Coast circuit. And I kept asking them and they kept saying horses don't learn this way. It's not how it's done. They're not, one person said they're not smart enough. And I thought, you're jumping 5.5 foot, 5.5 foot jumps on somebody you don't think's very smart. I'm not sure he's the smart one there. But I kept hearing that. So I kept looking at it. And then I came across an article from somebody named Tom Dorrance, which, a lot of people know who that is. But I didn't. I just saw a People magazine article and I thought he sounds different than what I'm hearing. So
this guy sounds like he's okay. He has potential.
This man. And so I talked to him and he was like, yes, definitely. I'm like, I'm a marine mammal trainer. And he was very supportive and said, yes, definitely this can happen. You should do it. And it turns out, he's very encouraging. So in that conversation, I thought, I'm taking lessons with Hap Hansen because Hap Hansen was one of the people I saw that night that looked like a walk in the park. And I thought I would take lessons at Hap Hansen's barn, which was right by me. And so that was the beginning of me taking lessons. But I set out to think I'm not out to change anything because I don't really know how it goes. You know what I mean? I didn't come in like I have a better way. I was like, I'm going to come in and learn how it's done so I can figure out how this fits together if it is possible, because so many people say it isn't. And yet I had with my own eyes seen target trained hyenas, meerkats, hippos, rhinos, lions, tigers.
You're
shark,
like, I'm not going
fish.
to be like a rocket scientist, but I'm pretty sure if I can train a hyena, I can do this.
That's kind of what I thought. I'm like, okay, maybe horses have some weird glitch in them that I don't know about.
Something. Yeah.
Yes, but I kind of thought, I just don't think it's true. But that science part of me. And then so I went along and I started taking lessons and that was all great. And, within a few months I bought a horse, and that was great. And then I met somebody who's going to be my husband and that was going to be my ex-husband. And his name is Vinton Karrasch, and Vinton is great. He's a good guy and he's a lovely rider. Rode with George Morris for 5 years, was long listed for the Olympics, has done FEI things and ridden, and he's a lovely rider. And so we became friends and we'd bounce ideas. He'd say, well, what would you do if this? How would you deal with that with positive reinforcement? What would you do? How would you do it? What would you do? And so then his friend, John Madden, not football, but Beezie Madden's husband, came out who wasn't her husband at the time, but was her significant other, came out to design courses in California. And so we went to have dinner and he said, tell John about the training you do with marine mammals. So I was like, okay, so I start talking and John Madden he is a sponge. He thinks outside the box. He's learning, he'll take it all in. And he just got more and more and more focused till at the end of the night, while we didn't really use clickers with the marine mammals, we had some left over from a different day and age. So I had clickers at the house and you couldn't buy them in stores at that point. That wasn't a thing, that was still so new. And so we went back and I gave him some a clicker, and he went back to Beezie's horses. So he left and Beezie had a horse who was terrified of the riding stick. You couldn't touch him with a riding stick. You couldn't have a riding stick. Your neighbor couldn't have a riding stick on the ground, under saddle, didn't matter. And he called and said the very first day, he said, I not only got this horse to touch the riding stick, I can't get him to stop. And if I can turn this big of a no into this big of a yes, this quickly, there's a place for this in Grand Prix show jumping. Please come here. Let's start a business. Let's do this. Let's figure it out. So, I mean, he was committed.
What's your last name again? Yeah.
He's in upstate New York. And I'm like, I'm in San Diego. I don't know about. And then we went and worked with the horses. And that's when at the end of that week, Beezie said, all the horses are remarkably better in the arena, which just cemented it for John particularly. He's like, see, this needs to happen. And was his biggest concern probably about winning? Yeah. He probably wasn't just thinking, I want happy horses, but what he did see is happy horses make better competitors.
Right.
So the happier the horse, the more well-adjusted the horse, and the happier, the better they are in the ring, the better they are at competing. And so it just made sense. And so that's where it started. I went and moved there, and he had the audacity to tell me, yeah, the winters aren't bad here. I'm like, yeah, from Wellington.
Yeah.
How would you even know? But
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's how it all started. And we worked with everything, from different things in different situations. Every horse that came through those doors got target training and bridge conditioning. So they learned the clicker, it was conditioned, and then the target was conditioned. Whether we did anything more with it or not, there was not everybody had things to work on, but to have them start doing some of the training just for fun stuff helped improve their performance. So we would just have fun and play with the horses a lot. But there's also situations that were serious. And one of the situations that was addressed with positive reinforcement was Judgement. So Judgement is a horse from Iron Spring Farms. He's a horse that was ridden by Michael Matz, again, Olympic, show jumper. And he had a water issue, the open water. And everybody knew he had this issue. Everybody. And it's not like he had some backyard trainer that doesn't know how to train. Right. He had Michael Matz working with him. So they just couldn't get rid of the issue. And it also turned out one of his sons had the same thing. So I don't know if there's some genetic component to their fear, certain things, but or if maybe it was even a little, well, he did, so he must, I don't know that who did what, but but so with that, they tried, to do things. They said, nope, he's not going to be so good. So they went to Mary Alice Malone, who owns Iron Spring Farms, and said, Mary Alice, we can avoid the water and keep him a national horse, or we can address the water or try to address the water and turn him into an international horse. Nobody had done anything of this caliber yet. I was still a marine mammal trainer that had now started working with horses. I didn't even document a lot of things because I was like, whatever. Nowadays I'm like, oh, they're like, how did you bring him along? And I'm like,
fed him some food, like click some stuff.
And people are like, I want to see it. And you're like, oh, well, first of all, cameras are like this big thing, But
yeah, exactly. Like we didn't have stall cams.
No, we had stall cams. We didn't have cell phones. We now had cell phones, but they were big. They were.
It wasn't the iPhone 13.
Yes.
Yeah.
So so then of course she said, well, let's address it. And so they pulled him from shows, and they ended up pulling him from shows for a year. Wow. And went back down to the babyest elements and said, first, bridge conditioning, target training. So he knew what the clicker meant, which is a way that we could bookmark and say, yes, that particular piece is what we like, or this particular piece. Taught him the target just to kind of advance the game, because it's the game of training is, when done well, becomes equally as important as the food. It's actually more important that they will choose the game over the food when it's done correctly. So they get him better. They say, we're just going to jump a little tiny X and click and reinforce. So now they're building a new and improved reinforcement history with positive reinforcement over the jump. And the little jumps weren't his problem, but the stronger the reinforcement history, the stronger it would carry it into the next place and the next place. And they just kept building up until they're jumping liberal pools, which wasn't his problem. And then to open water, not the biggest, and then bigger and bigger and bigger, then took him off property, and till he just was loving jumping water. He didn't just tolerate it, he loved it. So they spent about a year doing all that. They really took their time and did it right. And by now I was off doing other things, but we still were in touch about it. And he then they took him to Spruce Meadows in the Derby, which is chock full of water. So people are like, you guys are crazy putting him in the Derby. He hates water. He is stopped here many a times. And they remember, so he stopped here many a times. You're wasting your money. I don't know what they're thinking. And then they're in the warm-up ring saying, target, click feed. Target, people thought they probably lost the plot. But then he went in.
It worked.
It did. And he went in. And the thing that John called about was when Beezie took him in the ring, and she rode him past the water, and he used to bulge away from the water, and he was nice and soft. So she she clicked him. It was before the timers, and he just nickered. He's like, because he knew it was game on. Right. So she continued on and clicked only the water jumps. She had built up to where she had a series of clicks. He knew to accrue those things, and he was clean. And the next week, I had like 8 international people saying, I need a tick clicker and a target. You're like, you kind of need more than that, but there wasn't a lot of resources back then. We didn't have internet like we do now. Yeah. But it became, a legacy, because then he went on to win big things. He now, all his talent could be maximized because they overcame the piece that was his Achilles heel. So it was super reinforcing, but it kind of, people really tend to say, oh, groundwork's one thing and ridden's another.
Right.
I don't see it that way. It really is. It's all the same. Taking it to show stuff, to big stuff is just as important as the ground stuff. And I think the ground stuff is good for the relationship because now when we go in there and say, we're going to face something together, they're going, okay, I love the game, really into my person and what we do together. And that can set the groundwork for it. Just like doing over the little jumps, they were just little dinky things that were way below him in his, level of schooling, but they could reinforce it and build that foundation before they took it to the more challenging areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's, kind of what you were talking about earlier, like you certainly to be able to jump Grand Prix, to be able to do, Grand Prix dressage, to be able to go eventing, there's a certain skill set and an athletic level that one as a horse and a rider have to have, or cultivate over through, what maybe we call traditional training. But then the other part of it that is probably the biggest part of it is the mindset and the emotional control. And we've spent so much time in the human psyche, right? Like, I mean, how many of us in the last 10 years have been with sports psychologists trying to figure out, box breathing and, and writing down, what sets us off at shows or what distractions happens or how to work on our focus and create new neural pathways for ourselves. And now there's this whole other element, and we realize, oh my God, you can do this with horses. Horses have brains. Like we can, and obviously, part of that difference is the frontal lobe part, but that actually just makes them a little more genuine than us,
Yes.
Like, it's a simpler process than kind of, the stories that we make up, but it's kind of crazy now. And I love what you said a second ago, that like a happy horse is a more competitive horse. And, if we can get that part across it, and it's so wonderful what happened with Judgment, because that's a story that you can share and is relatable. And you say, look, it did work. Like it works, it's part of it. And it's worked at the highest level with the highest professionals doing the highest things. It's amazing. It's an amazing concept. And to be able to feel like if you can add that one part into your training and start to, like you said, create like a more well-rounded mindset and thought process. And then the riding part, yes, you're going to have to connect it with a skill set that's appropriate for what expectations you have. But it kind of starts in the brain, right? Like, I mean, that's where all of that learning stuff happens. I've heard.
Yeah. Yes. And that's exactly it. It starts in the brain, that's where it all begins. And we can take it to the whole kit and caboodle. And they, just like you said too, they're more simplistic. So that makes it even easier. People say, does this work with kids and husbands? You're like, yes, it does. But there's a lot of factors. They're more complicated. I'm just, change your reinforcers, I think.
Yeah. You're like, I'm not ready to take that on.
But it is really their brains. And then we also start to recognize maybe what I've been doing and my nervousness or my frustration or my harriedness is affecting how they feel about it.
Yeah.
We come in with our intentions, and they can feel a little like, what's up with you?
Yeah.
So sometimes I think one of the biggest things I think of is really trying to have fun with the horses. When we worked with marine mammals, people don't always know this, but they got all their food each and every day, regardless of what they did or didn't do. They got all their social interactions each and every day, regardless of what they did or didn't do. So we show up, and yet, because we were SeaWorld, we were expected to have high criteria. We weren't just going to do whatever we got. We were kind of on a world platform, considered the best in the world. So we're expected to have very high criteria. So then you're thinking, well, how do I get high criteria when they get all their food, even if they go, nope? Then you go, okay, well, here's your food.
Yeah.
That's kind of a challenge. Yeah. But what it was is we had to be sure that it was fun for them. Mm-hmm. So when we showed up, they're like, yay, the humans are here. What are we going to do today? And so so you start little, and you say, hey, can you do this? Teaching a horse a backflip can take like a year. Because it's
not or a dolphin.
Oh, a sea lion. Did I say a horse?
Yeah, I'm like, I can teach a horse, no problem. Some of them just come here knowing how to do that.
Unfortunately,
we do not click and feed that.
But it can take a year, and so that we know that we're going to a really high criteria place. But it was really the key was making it fun all the way through. Mm-hmm. So the next thing you know, they're like, ooh, I love trying really hard, and it gets more and more complicated, more and more challenging. And they kind of get that as a general way of thinking. They think, ooh, I'm really good at problem solving, so I want to do it, and they you build up slow enough. But I think you really touched on something that a lot of people forget about the horses is we got to go physical first. Are they okay? If any behavior all of a sudden creeps up, it means that to me, I stop and go, wait, this is a behavior change. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go physical first. Is something happening? Is something going on? Are you hurt? Does your saddle fit? Did you do something? Maybe it's just playing in the paddock, and they pulled their back, but I kind of go first. Let's rule out that there's anything physical going on. So you got to do that first, and then go to the emotional part, but figuring those pieces out and then thinking, well, how do we work through it if we kind of check those pieces out, and then we can move on to the emotional part of it, but making it be fun for us and them. So we have to kind of think, I intentionally smile during things. There's that one study where they showed horses a picture of somebody smiling and the same person not smiling. They were drawn to the smiling picture all the time.
I saw that. Yeah.
And that kind of says something that they prefer that. They know what goes with that. Totally. So we need to genuinely be like, okay, put my big agenda aside and think of my little steps. Today, if I can just get him to take a step in that direction or a step towards, a turn on the haunches or whatever the piece is, and celebrate that for today and think that's the greatest thing and move on and do other fun things. We keep them engaged in it and them thinking, oh, I'm such a good problem solver. I love this. Right. And when this is a game changer with the performance horses, particularly, but you think about it, what is in it for our horses to do, a flying lead change? Mm-hmm. There's not a lot in it, and so when we put something in it, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, there's something in it that I value. Right. Well, now they become invested in the training and the outcome of the training. Now, this is where it changes, because now they're like, look, there's an answer in here somewhere. How can I figure it out? So teaching them that they're good at problem solving. Then when you go, okay, we're going to try something that's new, they don't go, I don't know. This is scary. I don't know what the answer is. They think, let me see. I'm going to try some things, and that part is really big. There was a horse that was John and Beezie's horse. He was young. They're two of their young horses were not ready for being ridden for a long time. And one was named Mint, and he was a thoroughbred, not off the track thoroughbred. He was track bred, racetrack bred, but bought as a yearling. So he came to John and Beezie as a yearling, and I started working with him then. Well, when he was coming along, I'm basically a green rider. I've been riding for a couple years, but and they said, you're going to bring him along. And I thought green horse, green rider, you know. but we just use the positive reinforcement. And there was a point I remember Vinton and John talking and saying he's like a 10 or 11-year-old horse. And I remember the 11 stuck in my head. I was like, 11? Who comes up with 11? But because he was so sensible, you know.
Right.
So as a 4-year-old, he wasn't all over the map. He just thought, what could it be? They're asking me to go forward and come back, and I'm going to put those together and raise my back, you know, and you
Right.
could click and reinforce that. And we're on our way to starting collection. Now, granted, there's a lot of physical stuff that needs to go with it till he could do more, but it was the very beginning of him putting them together without worry. You know, he wasn't worried about it. He didn't feel frantic. He just thought, what could it be? And when they're really that invested, we truly have a partner who finds value in the training process. And again, it then becomes really kind of environmental enrichment. You know, they look at it, the marine mammals looked at and thought, yay, the humans are here. You know,
Right.
we are their entertainment. And yet we're working together to do things. So I think that part is so important for us to embrace and recognize that we can really turn things into this fun game.
Absolutely. And that, and it seems to ring, you know, like we can really relate to that as learners ourselves in situations where we look forward to learning and training and like expanding our horizons, or certain areas where we're really like anxious. Like if I have to go to the accountant and talk about my taxes, I go like, I am sweating, you know, like even though I have the nicest accountant and he breaks it down for me, I'm like, I can't. Right. But if we have like you come in, our clinician, I am like so excited about learning, and that environment feels safe to me. And I think it's very similar for horses when you like, sometimes it's very situational, and it especially given history or baggage, like we had talked about at the beginning, like some man-made stuff, that they can be very confident and really good problem solvers in certain situations and really not in other ones. And if we can develop a language really with them that helps them realize that all of this is problem solving, and that problem solving is fun, and it is a game. It's actually not a problem, you know, like
Yes.
it's a game as opposed to a problem. It can open a whole new world. And I hadn't thought about that until you said that in the beginning about how, you know, even innately the horses are how they've survived forever is to look for the wolf in the woods, right? Like to not think, just to run. And so what we're doing now is kind of reprogramming, regrooving, trying to figure out a different way for them to look at the world, and the world that now we've kind of, whether they like it or not, we've kind of brought them into our world. You know, the least we can do is help them with their mindset and tell them it's safe and it's fun. Actually, you know, it's more than safe, because I think that might be the evolution of it, right? Is that part of motivation? Obviously, one of the things that motivates horses is safety. But if we can elevate that and evolve that into, it's not just safety, like safety almost is like a given. It's like being born into a first world country in a good family. Like I didn't grow up worrying about the roof over my head, you know, like I was like, oh man, is my brother going to get to take the car? You know, like, you know, like it would be nice for the horses to start to be able to think in a way that's got less to do with safety and more to do with fun, you know, like an evolution of training in that direction could be really exciting. And who knows what the partnerships could do then, you know, it could be really incredible. I don't know.
I think you're so right. I always think of this analogy, and I haven't thought about it in a long time, so I guess I don't always. Once upon a time, I thought about it a lot. If you have a kid who's let's say a really good swimmer, but his parents kind of push him to do it, and his coaches push him to do it. I mean, he still has choice, but he kind of feels pressure that I really should do it. This is for them. And then you have another kid, but he's talented. He's really talented. And then you have another kid who loves it with all his heart. Not as talented, but he wants to be there, and he can't wait to go swim and practice and swim and practice and swim and practice. Who's probably going to go further?
Right.
It's going to be the one whose heart's in it, you know? So if we can turn that into a situation when they're like, I love this. I don't just tolerate this. I love this. And I want to do this. And this is exciting. And I'm really good at this.
Yeah.
Then we're going to have a horse that's going to go further and really is physically going to last longer. You know, when we're trying to make them do things that they're fighting, it's not the same as a horse is going, I'm stretching, I'm doing my thing because I want to. So I
Yeah.
think that we can really change that, their motivation in that, and really the outcome of that. And one of the things that there was a study that was done, it was back in the late 60s. And what they did, they started with pigeons, but then they took other animals and they taught them to hit a lever for food. And first it was free food, then they taught them to hit a lever for food, then they gave them both options back. And what do you think they tended to do? They tend to ignore the free food and go to the lever for food.
Right.
So knowing this, it means there is something in them that likes to play the game. I think about it, for me, I love to do like crosswords and Sudoku. And so Sudoku. And so I don't like saying as much as doing it, but but it is, I love doing that. My mind likes solving puzzles and playing games, or, video games or board games or sports. It's all some form of game that we like to play. There's something in us that likes it. And I think the training, they have that need as well. They have those animals have shown that they have those preferences as well, that they will ignore the free food and go to the lever for food. It's not really about the food. Now, is it? It's about the earning the food. So I think, or, showing their skill to get the food. So I think there's something in all of them that wants to play games and be good problem solvers. So if we can look at it and go, okay, you're a bit of a quitter, so I'm going to take the tiniest little things, There's some of them where you are like, okay, you just need to look at it and I'll take that for now, and that'll be good. And there's some that are barging headlong into it, so if we have a way that we can kind of help them learn that they're really good at it, pretty soon they have confidence in that area and they can go in that direction. And I think another piece to keep in mind, this is just kind of a basic premise. If your horse is doing anything, let's say your horse is, he won't go in the trailer. He paws at dinner time, whatever it is. If any behavior is increasing and or maintaining in frequency, something's reinforcing it.
Right.
All there is to it. It all serves a purpose. So if a horse won't go, they're either getting something they want or avoiding something they don't want. So if a horse won't go in the trailer, there's a reason, and it serves them, and they think this is a better option. So they're most likely avoiding the trailer. So they balk and they won't go forward, or they're going to rear, or whatever, they've come up with. But a horse who loves a trailer thinks, I love the trailer. Why wouldn't I get in the trailer? Step aside. Right. I've had horses canter into the trailer. And you're like, okay, that's not safe. But
this is going to work against me at some point.
But so when you think of it, if you see something, and I've worked with horses who want to kill people, that they have developed some hard look at people, and they've learned that if I am the aggressor, then I will keep the human off of me. So it was born out of fear, but it's become their go-to now. So now they're proactive with their fearful response, which is dangerous. So, but I try not to take it personally. I try to look at it and think, okay, this serves them. This works for them. And so what I need to do, I don't focus on what I don't want. I'm going to focus on what I do want. So instead of thinking, I don't want them to kill me, I think I want them to stand quietly. So I'm going to look for, or go to a target or some other piece, a horse that bucks. I'm not going to think, don't buck. I'm going to think I want a nice, smooth transition, or wherever it might be. And so recognizing it, not taking it personally and not labeling them, and just thinking, okay, well, this works for them for some reason. Maybe it was, it was pain at one time, and now whatever caused the pain is cleared up, but they don't know it. So whatever it is, I have to go, okay, this has served them. So what small steps can I take to start to give them a new idea? So knowing they're going to choose the thing that has the strongest reinforcement history, the thing that has worked for them the best. So if I say, okay, bucking at the trot transition is what you're choosing to do. For some reason that has you unseat the rider. Now they're not asking for it, or they fall off and now they're not in the saddle, whatever the moment may be, or the reinforcer may be. I may not know that. But I can think, but what do I do want? I want a smooth transition. So how can I break that down to a smaller piece where I can get more relaxation in that transition, less tension in that transition, less tension in the trot that comes after. So focusing on, instead, take it personally and saying, okay, you're just being a jerk. I just
Right.
think, okay, well, that's working for you right now. So it's up to me to think of what small steps can I do that I can change your mind and help you to make a new choice. When I get the good thing to happen, I can start to reinforce it and build up a new reinforcement history, which will now affect future choices because they'll choose the one with the strongest reinforcement history. So I think of it like scales, that are out of balance. So if there's a lot of weight on the side, says avoid the trailer or buck or whatever the piece is that I don't want to see, I realize this one that I do want to see, I need to start weighting this side of the scale until this outweighs this.
Right.
And a lot of times this is a problem an error we make is we have a tendency to stop when it's here. Well, it can teeter back very quickly. So I tend to weigh it down pretty heavily so that when I do take it to the show and ask for that transition, all that excitement of the world around them doesn't filter into it. They think, no, I know what to do and I like to do it. And it's very clear. So we can help bring clarity into the picture as well as changing their perception of it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and even to the point there where you build it so strong that they don't even have to have that thought. They just do.
Yes.
Like we said, it's there's a time where you're building that or getting the scale to go in your favor, and then you keep going that way until it's almost forgotten it was the other way. It's just there was something I was watching and it was it was honestly, it was on a masterclass thing that Ian Miller did. And he said, I don't jump this jump until I get it right. I jump it until I can't get it wrong, which was, really like interesting. It's like, you just keep doing it until it's like almost forgotten the other thing,
Yes.
And then in pressure situations like showing or something like that, it's like, well, it doesn't matter, but you still, even if it slips away from you 10%, you're still on the upside of the scale.
Yes,
still.
exactly. Because it's their comfort zone. And like a neural pathway is just like a deep place where the river flows. So if it's just kind of shallow, it can go in either way. But if we can make a nice new deep neural pathway, they're just going to go into that place. That's going to be their choice. And like you said, they're going to do it without this sense of entitlement. I think when it's really a challenge, they're thinking, "Ooh, I did it. I faced my fear. Are you going to reinforce me?"
Yeah.
But then as they get better and better with it. Pretty soon they're like, yeah, I don't even know why I like it anymore. It's classic conditioning. They're like, it's just endorphins and dopamines. I don't even know.
I don't even question that stuff.
Yes. When I first started having, so Minty was brought along with positive reinforcement. And he learned it all through positive reinforcement. And that was all great. And he was all good. And then as he got to be older, I would have him I would have other people ride him, people that had never reinforced him. And never were going to reinforce him. They didn't have food on them. And he would be great for them because he's like, I love Canada Part. Why wouldn't I do a Canada Part?
Right.
He didn't think you owe me. He had his neural pathways and his association was all good. He's like, I love these pieces. I love all this stuff. So I think that's kind of our goal. And at that point, there's no clicking and reinforcing for that. I mean, I still keep it in my picture, in the big picture, but not for each individual behavior. I start thinking, how can I fade it? I'm not in a hurry to fade it, but I start thinking, well, now that I've got it, where's it going to go from here? And how
it's like anything, right? Like, it's not like, it's like anything positive. If you tell somebody they do a good job, well, I told you one time, I'm never telling you again that you did a good job. It seems silly to think you would never tell somebody they're doing a good job at some point, especially if it's expected. Okay. But then if they do something extra, you're like, yeah, that was actually really good. Or I appreciate you, every now and then you just remember to appreciate someone or say something. And it's just a kind gesture,
yes,
you can just be kind. Like, why not?
And that's what I've always felt like, just because Minty is great with his Canada parts doesn't mean I don't sometimes say thank you.
Yeah.
You're good at that. Once in a while, I'm going to click and reinforce it. Yeah. Somebody had asked Vinton. Vinton is kind of quiet. So he's my ex-husband. And he was pretty quiet. And when we were first doing clinics a million years ago, somebody asked him directly. They said, when do you get rid of the clicker and the food?
Mhm.
And he said, and I was like, what are you going to say? Mr.
Don't say
Quiet
the
Man.
wrong thing. Yeah.
Or else I'll beat
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
exactly.
So as he said, I was taught to grab my stick and to grab my spurs and to grab my bridle. And he said, the difference the food makes in the horse, the positive reinforcement makes in the horse, why wouldn't I grab a couple cookies?
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, touche.
Good answer.
So
I've taught you well.
yeah. So it was, but I thought, isn't that really
Yeah.
profound and really true? It's just to have a few on us. It's not a big deal, but we tend to, it's kind of got a stigma to it that people
Yeah.
are like, oh, don't hand feed. They're only doing it for the food. Well, it's not the case if it's done correctly. If it's
Right.
done poorly, every single time we feed our horses, we're reinforcing something. So
Mhm.
people oftentimes, not knowing, unintentionally reinforce poor behavior, and then we get more poor behavior.
Yeah.
And so it looks like we've wrecked the horse, but in fact, what we've done is just reinforce that. So if that behavior is occurring, it means they think this is going to work.
Right.
As opposed to thinking, I think I'll just keep my head to myself. I think that should be a better choice.
Right.
And so we reinforce that new and improved choice,
Yeah.
for our sake,
100%. Well, I think it's really interesting. And that's where I found the food actually highlighted a lot of situations that I did not know I was reinforcing. Until I had food to reinforce stuff. And then I was like, whoa, I got to be a little more careful. Like I would have considered myself, I would like to think I pay attention and I notice things and I'm pretty open. And then when I started, having the food involved, I realized I needed to be like twice as, or if not more vigilant about everything, because
Yes.
now all of a sudden I had 2 eyes, 2 ears kind of following me going, okay, what are we on? What are we on? What are we on about? Because there's now food involved. There's a super motivator here. And and it took me a couple days playing back and forth to figure out, like, for me to actually do some exploring by myself without the horse. And we had talked about this, kind of going, okay, what is the bigger picture of what I want to reward? Because I started very technical, very specific, like, this is what this canter, I need to get this to part, blah, 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 blah. And then I realized, like most things, it's not about the canter to part. There's a bigger tension issue, learning some baggage, some things. I needed to back up those steps quite a bit to figure out, what do I want to start with? What's the small piece that I wanted to start with? Because I didn't have, it was like trying to do calculus with, just having learned 1 + 2, like,
Yes.
but it was a real highlighter. It's even like, it's a funny parallel, but when I make people trot fences or have really long approaches to fences and people say, oh, I hate that, I don't want to do that. I'm like, that's because there's nowhere to hide. You just have to canter up and jump a jump with no other variables. So it's going to highlight if you get nervous, if the horse gets nervous, if you start doubting yourself, if they start doubting themselves. And then we at least know where we are. Like,
Yeah.
and then we can kind of break that down. It's we can break it down, but that's kind of what I found was interesting when I started to play by myself with some of this. I was like, oh, sure, blah, 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 because you make it look really easy. Like anybody that's really good at what they do, you're like, oh, and then I'm like, oh my God. I need to take a second and I need to, like, phone a friend. Can you come back out here and help me? But I think it's such an interesting, mindset to have. And I actually wrote down, and one of the questions I wanted to ask you for our, for our listeners is there a way that you would advise, and what I would personally say is, like, looking on your website, there's so much information. You have such a huge following and you have so much information and content online. There's no excuse not to, be able to do this well, to be honest, other than just not looking up the information. But, how would someone get started if they listen to this and they're kind of like, this sounds really cool, I'm really interested? What would be your first step of how to learn more?
And I think that's a good question. I think that the first foray into it that I think is really helpful is my podcast.
Mhm.
So it's called Equine Clicker 101, and it's lessons, so we're going to be in the classroom. We're going to talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it, what we're going to look for. Then I go do it and talk through that part. And then we come back and regroup and what went right, what went wrong, how did we do it? So it's a really kind of a walk through it. It's
Mhm.
not just this is it and go do it. It is like,
Yeah.
let's really break this down and do it. So a lot of people have found that way very helpful. I think also coming to a clinic is a great way to kind of see it,
Yeah.
because the podcast, you're listening to it and I do talk through it and it has helped people. But I think there's just a difference when you kind of see, and the horses bring so much to the equation that you sometimes just have to, it's different. I
Mhm.
can't even predict what's going to happen. I just have to
Mhm.
get out there and go, okay, let's figure it out. So
Yeah.
I think those are great ways to go.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, I don't know how many horses we had, like 10 or something,
Uh-huh.
and they each brought something new to the party. So any doubt or any question or any like, well, what if a horse does this? What if a horse does that? You just wait till the next horse, and ultimately they did it. And you're like, okay,
You're like,
how are we going to handle this? And what I thought was really neat, and this this has influenced my training quite a bit. You practice this way. We've had a lot of other really good horsemen on the property that practice this way, that the learning really does happen in small stints, like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, put them away. These aren't sessions that are lasting an hour. They're 10 or 15 minutes, right? Is most of the time what you're
yes.
spending with the horses.
And I love that you brought it up in talking, and I didn't have a chance to really point out, but it is the small steps. It's
Mhm.
really small steps. So it's just kind of, we have a tendency to think in big clumps in the traditional horse training. So sometimes I'll think, no, let's break it down to the littlest thing and keep it in really short steps. So
Mhm.
you just say, just put a foot on the ramp for now. I'll feed you a ton for that. And then they're like, I can do that again. And you're like, yeah, well, we'll do it in a few days,
Yeah.
and then you bring them out again. They're like, I'm gonna put both feet on. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
that's great. And and taking that and celebrating that and building upon those little steps. So sometimes people call and they're like, well, one, they'll say, oh, it's all falling apart, because of this and this. I say, how long's that been going on? They're like, just today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, well, when it's been a few days. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody has a
Totally.
bad day now and then.
Yeah.
But the other piece a lot of times is that they've tried to do too much.
Yeah.
They said, well, I just put them in and move somebody just recently said, I'm really having a hard time with the trailer loading. And I've been following, I would do that. And it was getting on. That's all great. She's getting on now. She's getting on great, but I cannot shut the ramp. And I'm like, well, you shouldn't be trying to shut the ramp yet.
Mhm.
You maybe have somebody back there and then just
Mhm.
maybe lift the ramp up 4 inches until she's good with that, and let that be.
Right.
And then, in a few days, maybe you're going to move it up 10 inch,
Mhm.
whatever it is. But there was a smaller step in there, but all they could see is the next step is close the ramp,
Right.
as opposed to, so sometimes we just need each other a little bit, an
Yeah.
outside set of eyes to say, okay, there's probably a smaller step in here that you might not be thinking about.
Mhm.
And there's, over the years, I've come up with so many, kind of out of the box ways of thinking, okay, your horse won't move forward. I got a plan,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that, we can teach them in a different way or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
So I think I love that you said that. It really is small steps and short bits, letting them
Yeah.
process that little bit. Don't drill it, just bookmark it. And one of the things we didn't talk about that people may not quite understand is the clicker, why it's so invaluable, or whatever bridge signal you want. Like we use the whistles with the dolphins and whales, so whatever your bridge signal is, whatever you want to do, it marks the particular behavior, a particular moment in time. So it's really important that we're doing it on the behavior we want to see more of. So
Right.
I would watch people work without clicker, and they would do things like feed their horse when they came out of the ring, but they didn't, the horse just thinks I got it for coming out of the ring. They don't
Right.
know it's for that clean oxer, on jump 8,
Right.
or whatever it is. So if we have a bridge signal we can use, we can say that is a piece that earned you a reward. So
Mhm.
it becomes more like a scalpel, and it brings a lot of clarity. And
Mhm.
clarity tends to bring more relaxation. So if we can bring clarity to the equation, then the horse knows what they did, and we can draw more attention to it. And everybody likes clarity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the word bridge as a bridge signal or anything really, because I can't remember what we were talking about earlier, but I've kind of found that if anybody in the horses anyway says never do this or always do that, I don't ever believe them, because as soon as you say, oh, I would never, then you get a horse and you're like, well, I might do that, right? Like like you can't be that close-minded in your approaches, you know, being open or anything, you know, anything that helps bridge that communication, you know, anything that helps bridge like the that was the right thing, or that's what I want, or do you understand? Because like you said earlier, most of the time the horses are just going towards the easiest thing, or what they understand, or what is at least, you know, the least stressful thing to do. You know, they're just going to move that direction. So if anything that we can use to bridge the information that we're trying to get across or trying to be helpful, you know, the better. Like, why not? You know, like it seems silly, like why not?
Yeah.
And I have found, and actually I think that's really interesting with the clicker and the food as well, because without even meaning to, it makes you take a break. You know, you have to stop.
Yes.
You know, and depending on what you're rewarding, sometimes you have to stand still for a long time, you know, so that they don't kind of start again when you're on them trying to get a little bit active, because they're really thinking about the food. You might have to stand there for 10 or 15 minutes. But, you know, I was reading something the other day that was talking about, you know, like horses reacting quickly, but thinking and learning slowly. Like they learn slowly, and they learn in the pause, and they learn in the gap. You know, it's almost like our reflective time. So even with the, you know, with the positive reinforcement and with the treat and the clicker training, you know, I'll stop 10 times in a ride, and that's not a lot actually, you know, but they get to take a break, and it's a nice moment for learning, if that makes sense. Like,
and I think what I love is I want them all to kind of slow down their brains. So sometimes I find more horses are on the anxious or busy or too big or too much side than the shut down and quiet or disengaged side typically. So they kind of go, oh, I'm so excited about all this. And we have to say, okay, I know, let's bring it down, you know, and have a way to help them bring it down. But if I ask them to do something and they go, blah, blah, and it's like this big giant movement with a lot of pieces, and I'm thinking, I just wanted the leg to move over, but I got a whole lot of other things. I'm going to click it because I need to say, yes, that was right. And I'm going to hope you got the right piece. But when you see them, and this happens after they do a little bit, you see them start to go, leg, you know, and they start to lift their leg, and you're like, yes, that's the piece.
Right.
And now we can kind of pull it apart. So the better they get at problem solvers, the more they try one thing at a time. So they slow down and try that thing. And that's a beautiful moment for me. When I see that busy horse slow down and be thoughtful, I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Now we're ready to learn, because teaching stuff is easy. It's getting the brain in the right place. That's the hard part. Getting them to have the right attitude, to slow down, to focus, to think it's great, to think it's fun. And that it can take a little bit of time. But when you get them there, I say, slow down, you'll go faster. Slow down, take the time, build the foundation. But in the long run, it's going to clip right along. And that's really exciting when we get there.
Totally. That's so awesome. Well, I mean, I think you even, you know, you go back to even Judgment taking that whole year off. Like, that's such an insignificant amount of time for the result, you know, like if you think about it, it really is, it feels like forever, I'm sure, in the moment, but it's such a small amount of time for the result. If, you know, and again, it's having confidence that you know where you're going to get to on the backside, but what's the alternative? You're just spinning in circles anyway. Like,
and that's a good point, that it really in the big picture, it is not a lot of time, because now you're going to have a horse that for years is going to do it. So why rush it? But it really is true, just to slow down, say, let's unpack this all the way and get it right. And it's so reinforcing.
Well, I've had you on this call for well over an hour, and I'm sure we could keep going. But I'm going to circle back to some of these questions that I sent you so last minute, so I apologize. But
no, that's okay. I like them last minute, honestly. I don't even like them. I just want to hear them.
Well, we tend to wrap all of our podcasts with this, and we've gotten some really interesting answers. So feel free to pass on any of them if you can't come up with something right away. But actually feel free to only pass on 2. I'm only going to give you 2 passes. Or I can answer all 5 of them. A lot of people answer all 5. But we'll just get started. Are you ready?
Yes.
Right? Okay. What is the biggest lesson a horse has taught you about yourself?
I think the biggest thing they've taught me is to slow down, to slow it down, and I can be excitable, like in a good way, but excitable is excitable. So I think
Yeah.
slowing down and I think also trusting the system when sometimes we want to get hurried for things, but just think it is progress. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we are making progress towards this goal, even though I think we should have moved faster because most do. Sometimes I have to slow down and go, it's okay. We are making progress.
Yeah, that's really good. I did a podcast last week. It's not out yet, but it's a really cool one, and it's with Kathy Barr, and she was talking about being able to elevate her energy and get herself up and get herself down or get herself in the middle without the emotional attachment, or like without having things laden with that kind of intensity of emotion. And that has been a really big learning thing. And that it's kind of just like you said, like you can be excited and all these things, but also minus the expectation, minus the hurry, is something that horses just, it doesn't work in your favor if, like it's kind of, it's interesting that you said that. Cause even when you were talking about the horses coming with things too quickly, like I get like that. I'm sure you get like that. I'm like, it's like, I need to count to 10. Like, it's really funny now because my son, whether he has an owie or he gets excited, he just starts counting to 10. And it's because like, and he can't count great yet. So it's like 1, 7, 6, 3, 10. And because whenever I have to take a second, I have to count to 10.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Okay. Do you have a favorite training or mantra that you reference regularly?
I think just reminding myself that it should be fun and not just for me, but for the horse too. So it's not a particular thing I say, but if I start to get a little too intense, you're just thinking, slow down, have fun, they have fun. We're going to get there and trusting the training with that. So I think just reminding myself that it has fun. And it's not feeling fun, I've got something else on my mind and I'm being kind of too intense, just stop. It's not maybe the day that I should be doing this, work on something lighter and not get so intense. So having fun, I think, is important.
Yeah, that's actually a great piece of advice to just, I think sometimes we don't do that enough when we bump up against those things, and it's for all of our sakes, just stopping is probably better. Go for a hack, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Take yourself for a hand grace. Is there a piece of advice that someone gave you along the way that you still reference today?
And I think it wasn't a piece of advice, but it was with Tom Dorrance. And the fact that he was still wanting to learn at his ripe old age. I remember thinking during that call that he still wants to learn. I want to always remember, I love learning, but I thought I always want to be open to learning and continuing to learn. Yeah. And so I think that situation really taught me something, and it reminded me just how important it is. We're never going to know all the answers, so I don't need to know all the answers. Just keep learning and growing, and that's a big part of life for me. So I think that guy Tom Dorrance did it. He didn't even know it.
Sometimes that's the best time. That's awesome. What do you do when you are seeking inspiration?
Seeking inspiration, I guess that depends on different things. Sometimes if it's a ridden thing, I want to watch good riders. If I'm thinking, okay, I'm kind of hit a flat point and I, or, it's kind of cold now, or whatever, that to watch a rider or think about a rider's story. And I think sometimes it's things on the ground, that might be that, I really want to take the young babies to have them exposure to something and thinking of where it's going to get the horse, and the advantages of it. I think that can be an inspiration because really, I feel like I'm here to serve the horses, not the other way around. Yeah. So as I look at it and I think, how much better are they going to be when they can go anywhere and they think it's all fun versus going someplace and going, what's happening? So whatever those pieces is, why am I teaching this? And how much better are they going to be because of it?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's a neat way to think about it, about like, I'm here actually to serve the horses and make their, that's neat. Okay, our last one. Have you had an experience or an adversity separate from horses that you feel has directly influenced you as a horseman?
Well, I would have to say it was probably the abuse, being sexually abused from such a young age through my teenage years. It really, unknown to me, when I was 7 years old, I remember thinking, I was about 7, and I remember thinking, I don't want to be a part of a person or animal's life if I can't help to improve their quality of life. And then very quickly, I realized people are complicated. That's not my problem there. But with the animals, it stuck with me. And still to this day, I'm living that. So I think that prepared me for this life. And I had no idea that this is where I'd be. But I think about it all the time, about how, that I want to improve their quality of life. So every animal I come in contact with, I want to be somehow making their life better. So I think that is something that still affects me. And it's also made me hyper vigilant, which is also good, because I think I notice little teeny tiny things.
Yeah.
For that mind that will never stop spinning.
Bad. It's such a powerful, I think that's such a powerful story that you have, and it's so powerful that you share it. And I think that was one of the things when you first came here and you shared that story, and it instantly, I had a lot of gratitude for you for sharing that, because you all of a sudden, there was just this connection that sometimes you don't see, like as far as when you said that story, and you said it as right almost in the same sentence as watching the horses get caught. And then as soon as they've got the halter on, they're yours, and you can do whatever. And you go, oh my God, and half the time you don't, it's like what you said, it's like what we've always done. And then all of a sudden you look at it from a different perspective, certainly one that you had, and go, wow, there's something we can do better. There is a time where if you're ignorant, you're ignorant, but then there's a time where we can just do better, and it's pretty amazing. Well, this has been amazing. This is what I am now very inspired. I just find this conversation and this way of thinking and this narrative so exciting for the future, and for the future of horses and people, and kind of where we're going to go from here. And I can't wait, to see where this kind of gets everyone. And I'm just so thankful that you came on here and that you're making all these horses' lives better. And hopefully we can just keep sharing that amongst all of our groups. But I think thank you so much.
That's fabulous. I love your enthusiasm, and I know that one day this will be accepted in the horse world. It's still new enough, but one day it'll be a norm, and that's a thing that's exciting. And it's people like you that really help get the word out there, and the way you and Tick are I just think you guys are great. So it's nice to see. It's reinforcing for me. That's what it is.
Well, I'm glad. Well, I'm going to strongly encourage all of our barn now. You'd be so happy. You'd be so proud. Our barn is filled with, like, there's just clicks happening all over the place, out cross country schooling, out in the arena. And I will share quickly. I have a student that I teach every week, and she's a vet, and she came to your clinic. And she got off of her horse yesterday. She was out here, and she said, you know what? The most exciting thing is that I used to not be able to catch the mare in the field. She said, now just from coming to your clinic and coming over and spending the space here and having a different mindset, she said she runs to the gate to meet me. And she used to balk at the trailer. And now she looks at the trailer and I can see it all over her face. She's excited. And like, what are we going to do today? And she said, and she's a vet from a very big clinic, it has been a real shift. And I think, I think it's just an awesome way to kind of move things. So I'm very appreciative. And so is everybody here at Copperline, and hopefully everybody on our Ride IQ app will be too. And they'll check out your website, because I will say that I can strongly, I can't enforce that or reinforce that enough, that watching you in action and listening to the podcast and really going through and learning the steps is going to keep a lot of people from getting a little bit lost. And I think that's really important in this process, is that you have so much information out there that people can really follow along in a way that's very, for lack of a better term, digestible. Like, it's really digestible information to follow. So we'll put a link up to your site so
Thank
people
you.
can do that as well. But
Perfect.
thank you so very much, and can't wait to get you back down here.
Yep.
And we'll have some sunny weather for you next time you're here.
Okay. That sounds fabulous. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Before you go, I just want to let you know more about Ride IQ. At its core, Ride IQ gives everyone access to instruction from the best equestrian coaches in the world. It might sound impossible, but with Ride IQ, you get access to the private mobile app that has hundreds of on-demand, listen while you ride audio lessons taught by top riders and coaches in eventing, hunter jumpers, and dressage. Here's how it works. You look through the app and choose a lesson based on your horse or a skill you're working on. There are lessons for green off-the-track thoroughbreds and nervous horses and horses that are behind the leg, as well as lessons that teach every stage of skills like shoulder in or trot lengthenings. Then you tack up and press play, and you have a top coach like Doug Payne or Leslie Law or Gina Smith in your ear guiding you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, it is always appreciated if you can take a moment to share the podcast with your friends and family and leave a review on your podcast app. The best way to support the podcast is to become a Ride IQ member at ride-iq.com. And when you do, we hope you're excited to see that In Stride is just one of multiple podcast shows on the app, including hack chats, conversations with coaches, and more. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week, and please do press follow or subscribe on whatever podcast platform you listen on. And as always, remember to pat your horse.